as they leave office this year to start their retirement. But the man, they say, came up with that idea isn't backing their story up. Mr. Justice Patrick Ryan led a commission that studied MLA pay issues 3 years ago and made a number of recommendations for changes. But he says $42,000 payments to retiring MLAs wasn't one of them. The CBC's Robert Jones has been following the story and joins us this morning to talk about it. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning, Terry.
Okay, Mr. Justice Patrick Ryan, what can you tell us about him?
Well, you know, Mr. Justice Ryan is currently New Brunswick's Conflict of Interest Commissioner. He's a former senior trial and appeal court justice in New Brunswick. Before that, he was a prominent lawyer there in Fredericton, admitted to the bar 54 years ago, you know, back in 1956. Very respected. In March of 2007, 6 months after the last provincial election, he was appointed by the legislature to review MLA pay issues and develop recommendations for changes, which he did. Then in April of 2008, MLAs voted on a bunch of those changes, and they took great pains to explain that every change they were making, including major changes they made to those severance payments for themselves, they all came directly from Mr. Justice Ryan. Here's Conservative House Leader Bev Harrison back in 2008 saying basically that MLAs were following Justice Ryan's recommendations to the letter.
He has come in with recommendations as an outside person, and I think the intent was that both parties would agree to abide by the recommendations of the Commissioner, and that is how it stands. So that's all I have to say concerning the bill that's before us.
So that's Conservative House Leader Bev Harrison, you know, basically putting all of the changes on Justice Ryan.
Okay, refresh my memory. We've talked about this issue a couple of times. We know MLAs made changes to their pay that ballooned the size of their pensions. But what specifically did they do with severance payments that they say Justice Ryan recommended?
Until 2 years ago, every MLA was entitled to a severance payment when they left office, but only until they hit their 8th year. Once you reach 8 years in the legislature, under the old rules, you lost the right to severance because, you know, you became eligible for something better, which was a pension. You could have one or the other, but you couldn't have both. 2 years ago, MLAs changed that. They made every MLA eligible for severance, no matter what. The old, 8-year cutoff was erased, and that change was an instant windfall to 26 MLAs who had more than 8 years. It granted each of them the right to a lump sum payment, $42,250 when they left office at the end of their term for any reason, or half that if they quit early. And we're talking big names here: Sean Graham, David Allward, Stuart Jamieson, Rolly McIntyre, Bev Harrison, the 26 most senior MLAs, Liberal and Conservative.
And that's where the $1 million price tag comes from.
Yeah, that's right. That's 26 MLAs times $42,000. It's a little over $1 million. That's basically what this one change costs.
Okay, and the MLAs are saying this was done because Mr. Justice Ryan recommended it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that was the claim, and it still is the claim. There was an article in the Telegraph Journal last week where Bev Harrison was still saying the severance program was expanded to everyone because Justice Ryan recommended it. I got an email from the clerk of the legislature saying the same thing, that everyone understood that this is what Justice Ryan wanted. I mean, the strange thing is, though, if you read Justice Ryan's report, it doesn't actually say that. He does express concern about the 8-year limit, for sure. I mean, especially for some MLAs, young ones who serve 8 or 10 years and then leave office before they can get a pension. This happened to former Premier Bernard Lord. He served 9 years, and he left office at the age of 41, so he got no severance, but he was still 14 years short of being able to collect on his pension. And Justice Ryan said changes should be made for situations like that, but the idea that severance, should be blown up and paid as parting gifts to MLAs who are retiring on a pension or those who quit to take an appointment in the Senate, there's just no suggestion of that in his report.
Now, Robert, I'm running out of time because I went a little bit longer than I was allotted on my interview with Jack Keir, but let me just ask you, have you talked to Justice Ryan about this?
Yeah, I called Justice Ryan, and I asked him about this, and he was very polite. He said he would review the whole issue and call me back. which he did, and, you know, and I asked him if I could interview him about it, and he said no, he felt his report spoke for itself. And I said, you know, I thought it did too, that my reading of the section was that MLAs had really voted themselves benefits here well beyond what he had recommended. And he said, you know, I'll never forget this, you seem to read and understand English very well. That's what he said, period. And that was it. He declined the interview request, but in that little exchange made it clear that, you know, these severance payments to retiring MLAs were not his idea.
Okay, what about the MLAs? What are they saying?
Well, we made a request to talk with senior members of the Legislative Administrative Committee. That was the group that had translating these recommendations into legislation. Nobody responded. And yesterday we tried to grab Liberal House Leader Finance Minister Greg Byrne at that Liberal caucus meeting in St. Andrews, but his people said he would not be made available for an interview on this subject, you know, and wouldn't be answering any more questions on this.
Robert, thanks a million.
My pleasure.
It's Robert Jones, our reporter in St. John. It is 7:31. It's time.